it's two things I want to bring up on that. It's funny you bring up Xavier Omar, but the other point I want to bring up really quickly is that is where I was getting at before I went down a rabbit trail because of ADD. Um, but like a lot of times when people pivot, they automatically assume that like, oh, they're going to go down that road of fill in the blank artist that pivoted and then soon left the faith. So
Right.
their mind says pivot, leaving faith. It's like no,
Right.
pivot, not doing Christian music, but still doing this, literally like you said, the same type of music, but just not feel like I have to like sprinkle in the Jesus song every now and then. I'm just gonna make dope R&B music. And it's funny you mentioned Xavier Omar. Like I live in the DFW area. We go to the same church. See that brother 3 out of 4 weeks. Like he's always in church. It's not like he left the faith because he's making R&B music. And it was like, it's funny. The first time I pulled up to the church, I literally got out my car and I stepped out and I saw him getting his wife and kids out the car. And I was like, I stepped my foot back in and was like, I'm tripping.
I know that's not who I think it is.
I was just like, snap. Like, okay. And that was my first Sunday going there. So it's like, pivot doesn't mean you're leaving the faith, even though we know some people who pivoted and left the faith. But if we want to keep it a buck, we have people who stuck to Jesus raps their entire career and they denounced the faith.
Right, that part.
So it's like you
can't blame the pivot on that one. You can't blame the pivot on that one.
Yeah.
So it's just like you can't. I mean, just keep it a buck. You can't blame the pivot on that one. It's a couple people I know that have left the faith, and I'm not even just talking about in Christian hip hop. It's unfortunately CCM artists who quietly have left the faith and still doing Christian music. Some of them still do Christian music. That's the crazy part. Yeah. But they're not believing what they're putting out. So it's just like, would you prefer that? Or would you prefer them to be like, I'm gonna just make my exit here. I ain't even gotta worry about that. And then you got some people who pivot into the secular lane, but don't change anything about how they go about presenting their art.
Yeah.
So it's just like that's like Xavier Omar to me is a perfect example because that to me, him and Sean C. Johnson were like two big musical male vocalists that influenced me, and I could probably throw Christian Grey in there too.
Yep.
That influenced me as far as like just doing more soulful type of records and like the way they stack their harmonies and just go about approaching records. And it's like, bruh, he's been making the same type of music since I found out who Spazzy Rocket was. Like, I remember the first EP I heard from him was with him and Sango, and I think it was called How Do You Love Me? I was like, yo, this is fire. Why aren't more people talking about him? But it's because he wasn't making youth groupie type of music. He was making more like music about love and relationships. And he still does that to this day. Hasn't changed. Still a Christian. Hasn't walked away from the faith. Like you said, y'all go to the same church. Like, what are we talking about? Like, you don't have to just be specifically boxing yourself into a Christian space in order to, one, be effective, or two, have a career in music. And it doesn't mean that you're compromising, one, your faith, or compromising your walk because you're not gearing your music towards a Christian audience. That's not, it's like we put and that's why I was saying earlier about it's very dogmatic in this space, unfortunately, and it's very black and white. And it's just like life isn't like that. There's some people who are gifted in the area of music and are able to make a career out of making music. That doesn't mean that they're gonna look at Daraj. He makes sync music now. He started in CHH, but now he's in the sync licensing field, making music professionally for commercials, TV, movies, and different things like that. And he has a whole music career now in music. And it's just like, does that mean he's compromising his faith because he's a professional musical artist that gets sync licensing? No, that's just his profession now. It's the same way if you were a carpenter or a doctor and that's your profession, are you compromising your faith because you didn't share the gospel with a specific, with each one of your patients? Guess what? You're in a field where you can get in trouble if you do that. That doesn't mean that you can't still pray for your patients. That doesn't mean that you can't still pray with your patients if they're okay with that. Yeah. However, in certain fields, in certain scenarios, there are certain guidelines that you have to follow and that you have to walk through, and that doesn't mean that you're compromising your faith because you're following those guidelines. That's a part of the job. So it's just like it's like we uphold this unhealthy criteria and standard that most regular people, and I say regular people, but I mean regular Christians, aren't even living up to.
Yeah. That's good.
It's like, oh, you want me to say Jesus 50 times in a song, but you don't even reference Jesus 50 days out of your year. So what are we talking about? What are we talking about? More of your conversations are without Jesus than they are with Jesus, but you want me specifically to say it 50 times in a song. I don't even say Jesus 50 times when I'm praying. So why would I say that in music? Like, that doesn't make sense. If I have a relationship with you, when I talk about my wife or I talk to my wife, I'm not saying her name 50,000 times in that conversation.
She know what it is.
She might get she'll get a nickname, she'll get a reference, she'll get a hey, she'll get like it'll be other forms of communication when I'm talking to her. So why, when I approach Jesus, am I having to not act like we don't have a relationship? That doesn't make sense. We have a relationship, so I'm going to communicate with you relationship wise.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, I ain't mean to get on that tangent, but
I ain't mad at it. I'm not mad at it because I feel like some of these things need to be said. Some of these things need to be said.